Dr. Blockson, which is like 16 minutes, and then hear Dr. Turner's remarks, which afterwards we'll, with the time remaining, we'll have go into discussion. Those ethical values that Dr. Blockson, and it's interesting when we just want to say, Dr. Blockson is someone that we give, wholeheartedly the honor of being the doctor in relationship to what his life work has been about. But those ethical values was to raise up that which is in ruins, to repair that which is damaged, to rejoin that which is severed, to replenish that which is depleted, to strengthen that which is weakened, to set right that which is wrong, and to make flourish that which is ensure and underdeveloped. And so with that said, we want to show this film about Dr. Blockson's life, and then we'll come back with Dr. Turner.
One day we were talking about American history. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Ben Franklin, others who contributed to the founding of this country. And I raised my hand, I asked her about the colored people, as we were called, the Negroes. Do we have a history? She said, no, Charles. Negroes were born to serve white people. There was a time in our history where we weren't permitted to read and write. A time in our history where any person caught with a book or reading or write, they were often whipped. But we have come a long way. Collecting is important. I call myself a bibliophile, which I love books. I'm a bibliophile, a book lover. I love to smell old books. I love to feel them. I like to go to the bookstores, get on my knees in antique shops and barns and all the other places. You can always pick them up, and you can always read them when you're lonely, when you're curious. Unfortunately, I guess I'm sort of a dying breed. I hope I'm not.
Charles Leroy Blockson was born in 1933 in the midst of the Great Depression to Annie Parker Blockson and Charles Edward Blockson. The eldest of 8 children, he spent his childhood in Norristown, Pennsylvania.
We had people of all races and colors and creeds on my street. Our parents told us certain things that colored a Negro that we would have to endure, because there was, even in Norristown, there were places that we couldn't go. So we had this de facto segregation.
Spurred by his teacher's painful words, Blockson unknowingly began what would become a lifelong journey to unearth, collect, and preserve the history, culture, and contributions of people of African descent.
I went into the Salvation Army stores and Goodwill stores looking for any book that said Negro, colored, African, West Indian, or Black. So I started to collect.
The budding historian and collector was also a star athlete in multiple sports, from junior high through his college years at Penn State. Even while playing sports, Blockson always found his way back to books. Later in life, he would turn down an opportunity to play professional football in favor of his collecting.
So wherever I traveled playing sports, where other teammates would go to the parties, I would go to the bookstore, then I would go to the parties. My roommates and teammates wondered, why do you always go to those bookstores? They didn't really know what I was collecting. In my room, my books competed under the bed with my boxing gloves, my footballs, my shot put and discus and all the other stuff. So it was a competition right there between books, athletics, and so forth. I'm glad that the books won out. I didn't have any idea at all that it would extend as far as it has over the years. It was more to pacify my own soul and intellect. And I guess underneath, from a psychological point of view, to prove my teacher wrong. So from a little boy curious going from the Salvation Army to Goodwill stores, my book collection excursion have taken me to many parts of the world. And it's led me to donating my first collection here at Temple University in 1984. The second collection is at Penn State.
The Charles L. Blockson Afro American Collection is one of our nation's leading research facilities for the study of the history and culture of people of African descent. We have over 700,000 items in the collection, which range from rare books, prints, newspapers, illustrations, pamphlets, music, personal archival collections, a whole host of materials. But these are like some images from Cheney.
Why don't you get a copy of the book? Oh, we could just hold it there.
And because Mr. Blockson started collecting when he was 9 years old, this is like a one-stop place.
My mother saved everything, all these photographs to the book, luckily. Let me see.
Just about every project I've done, I always come to the collection because everything's here. And on top of that, I just like to pick a book off the shelf to read sometimes.
I have books, the oldest book in the 1500s, and books about poetry, books about children, and all kinds of images to tell our story. In order to tell the whole history, the true history, you must include the pride and prejudice. One of the most important books in the collection was called The Underground Railroad. When I was a little boy, my grandfather would sing a song in the Highway to Heaven, walking up the King's Highway. I said, "Grandpa, what are you singing about?" He said, "I'm singing about the Underground Railroad." He said, "My father, your great-grandfather, escaped on the Underground Railroad, went to Canada. The code word for Canada was heaven." So it came back to me. I looked in the book and found page 488. It said, "Arrival from Sussex County, Delaware. It's 1858. And the first name, it says Jacob Blockson." So it verified what my grandfather was talking about. His father and his relatives escaped in the Underground Railroad. Later I found they escaped, several of them with Harriet Tubman.
Throughout his career, Charles Blockson has written articles and books about the Underground Railroad. His connection with Harriet Tubman grew even stronger when he was entrusted with several personal items belonging to the abolitionist by her great-grandniece. He donated those items to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture in 2010.
You can see on the back of the card lots of interesting information about where the photo.
I like to bring my students to the collection so that they can see the range of African American materials, images of African Americans where they were. I want the students to see the text that we're reading within a broader context. Here's this complicated, intricate, interwoven body of material that crosses all kinds of geographic, cultural lines. This is a collection that you could come to and be surprised and make a discovery.
Phyllis Wheatley is one of the epitomes of collecting. She was enslaved and brought to America and sold to a Quaker family in Boston, Massachusetts. She learned to read and write, and she started to write poetry. In 1773, she had the honor of becoming the first woman of African descent to publish a book of poetry. There's only about 6 or 7 known copies of this book. I was in love with her. She haunted me here, haunted me there. Whenever I went to a bookstore, a rare bookstore around the country, someone would beat me to it. So a friend of mine, an old bookseller, sent me the copy of Phyllis Wheatley, and paging through the book, tears came into my eyes when I realized that this book, this young lady who haunted me from bookstore to bookstore, I finally held her in my hand, and I didn't realize until I located it's signed by her. It was an autographed copy of Phyllis Wheatley. This book is a cornerstone of American literature as well as African American literature. The Paul Robeson sculpture was created by Antonio Salemi back in 1925. Paul Robeson was internationally known as an actor, singer, scholar. I was drawn to him because I used to listen to his records when I was young. I was able to meet with him 3 times when he was in Philadelphia. I donated a huge collection of Robeson items pertaining to his life here at the collection. The postcards existed from the 1890s up until around the 1970s. They would mock people of African descent. People would go away on vacation and send them back to friends and families.
It's these African Americans, their bodies still exploited and put on display, like, you know, without consideration or respect for the dignity of human life, and that they would be mass produced and then distributed in such a careless way was very illuminating, because you see the address on the back and you see that someone actually went and bought and sent this, and that really brought that home to me.
The shackles are very emotional. I hesitated in the beginning whether I should even try to preserve them, but nevertheless, they sort of went along with the books and manuscripts that I have pertaining to enslavement. To know that my own ancestors were enslaved. There's a story behind these shackles that is a part of the history. My eyes was always on the positive as well as the negative. This is the negative part of our history. This is the key that inserts into the lock here to open the lock. They made them for the arms and the ankles, and sometimes they had them around the mouth.
For a lot of students, and I think for a lot of Americans, ideas about slavery are so removed from our everyday experiences. And so to look at something and imagine an item like that being worn by another human being is just, well, it's very sad.
From the shackles, we emerged into writers, judges, preachers, ministers, actors, all kinds of endeavors in life. It gives me strength and determination to carry on.
This collection tells a story of tremendous diversity. There's something to be said, not just for the materials that are collected, but just the process of collecting and creating this archive that says this is a sacred project, you know, and that these are important materials. This is a story worth telling. And so you see, African-American culture has been foundational in the development of American society.
Charles Blockson is not only a collector, but an educator, historian, and author, writing articles and books on varied topics, including Black genealogy. He has championed the placement of markers at significant African-American historical locations around Philadelphia, and has become one of the Philadelphia area's most trusted and treasured voices.
We call him a gentle giant.
It's so good to see you.
He's a warrior too. He encourages everyone to document their histories.
I'll be very careful.
Whenever he walks in the room, people just are in awe of him. Oh,
You
thank
didn't bother me all week, so I'm doing good.
Well, that's why I did, so you would be glad to see me today. Because more than anything else, he's been dedicated and committed to the preservation and dissemination and documentation of African American history and culture. And he's been consistent with that over the years, even when it wasn't in vogue.
And I can get copies of this, so I can get copies for our classroom libraries at school.
I have a few more at home.
Oh, it's always great. He knows everyone, and if he doesn't know someone, you can never tell because he's just so open with people.
Do you have a copy of Moses yet?
It's impressive too, because whatever you're working on, he'll just look over and he'll be able to tell you all about whatever you're doing. So he's a really smart man.
Years later, about 20, 30 years later, I met my school teacher, and she was apologized. She said she didn't know when she told me Negroes were born to serve white people. She said she was always hurt because this is the way she was taught. She said she's proud of what I was doing as far as our history, so I didn't hold any grudges. It was like I forgave her. The only way to improve ourselves is to understand people of all races, their history, their contribution to this country and to the world. I hope that I have given them to the world something of myself, part of my soul, to whoever would accept it, and that they would also pass it on. I realize my life ambition. I believe that by being a collector, to collect, preserve, and to disseminate this knowledge. Knowledge belongs to the world, and my experience from books and so forth should be passed on.
So, if may, Dr. Turner,
Yes.
and hearing, let me see if I can bring up. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, because what I want to do is, I think I'm gonna stop stop sharing. There you go. And I wanted you to a lot of us are docents primarily, so we deal with the history of Black Philadelphia, particularly, especially being at the African American Museum, and there's other docents that are at different locations, the cemeteries, and doing tours. And it just seemed that Dr. Blockson is instrumental in assisting us in our narrative. Could you expand on what, as you said, his meaning to us and the narrative that we're supposed to be constructing based off of his life work?
Okay. So first I'd like to start off, and make some comments about the documentary. Sharon Stanford, she was actually up at Penn State. And the one I saw had more related to the Blockson collection in Philadelphia at Temple, because our collection is the largest. Mr. Blockson donated that collection, I think, after I actually came in 2007. But the staff from Penn State came down to our collection, and they were very jealous because, our collection is much bigger than theirs. Now, in terms of Mr. Blockson, I also want to state, he was my mentor, but also like a father to me. I would call him every Sunday, religiously. Every Sunday, him and I talked. And sometimes his daughter would be there, or if not, she would say, yeah, my dad told me you called her. He's waiting for you to call, or something like that. So and we had a lot of conversations, and oftentimes when people become as famous as he was or is, because we're going to continue his legacy, they don't understand what it took to get there. And really, he always talked about, what a struggle it was, because you figure he started collecting back in 1943, when the larger society didn't think we even had any history. And then, in our community, because of miseducation, oftentimes they would say, why are you collecting that old Negro stuff? So, I mean, it was a long, hard journey for him to get to where he was. And he basically used his own personal money to do all of that. So I just want to stress that. Now, in terms of his contributions, what I did was I wrote down some things because there's so much. So if you bear with me, I'm going to give you some dates and some of his contributions, just to give you an idea. But to really talk about his contributions, it would probably take, I'd probably need about a year of teaching a course on Mr. Blockson, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start in 1969. And what I'm going to do is mention things that they didn't mention in the film. So in 1969, the Christian Science Monitor wrote a feature article about Mr. Blockson's collection. Then in 1972, Mr. Blockson started writing a monthly column entitled Black Voices in Today's Post, which is a Montgomery County newspaper. And what was mentioned in the film was in 1975, he wrote his first book entitled Pennsylvania's Black History. And there was a copy of it, I believe, in the film. Then his second book, which I have here, Black Genealogy. People are constantly calling us about this book. And what we thought we were going to try to do is contact Paul Coates to see if more copies of it could be made. But the importance about that book is the fact that it came out around the time of Roots. And this was really the first book that really dealt with Black genealogy. In 1974, he served as a charter member of the planning committee for the African American Historical and Cultural Museum at that time. And so he was on that charter member from 1974 to 1975. He also, in 1976, he became a founding member of the Pennsylvania Black History Committee. And as you know, the Pennsylvania Black History Committee, they would have a conference every year. And there was one at the African American Museum, and then there was one at Lincoln too. Also in 1976, he served as president of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. And that same year, he was also advisor to the Philadelphia Constitution Center. In 1979, Mr. Blockson was awarded an honorary doctorate degree in education from Villanova University. And then in 1980, and I have the catalog here, he served as guest curator and project director of the exhibition Color, Humanities, and Statehood, which opened at the African American Museum, the Black Experience in Pennsylvania over 3 centuries, 1681 to 1981. And this is the catalog. In 1984, in 1981, also that same year, he wrote his third book, and I have a copy of that, The Underground Railroad in Pennsylvania. And this was very important because Mr. Blockson was the major advocate for the Underground Railroad. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on with some more dates. In 1984, he donated his collection to Temple. But in 1973, what happened was Lawrence Reddick, before he went to the Schomburg to become director up there, he was a professor of history at Temple in the history department. And he took a group of scholars to Mr. Blockson's house and appealed to Mr. Blockson to bring his collection to Temple. And if you look at it in the context of the times, what's happening in 1973?
What's that? You know, I mean, I'm trying to think of.
It's not the Black Power, no, that was later.
Yes, exactly. You know,
Uh-huh.
so we're moving from civil rights to Black Power or Black empowerment movement. And so students are starting to demand that African American history be incorporated into curriculums. And so, you know, when they went there in 1973, it was very timely because prior to that, Temple had a dearth of materials that related to the Black experience. And then it took Mr. Blockson 10 years to decide to bring his collection to Temple because he was still collecting. But one of the major reasons why he decided to bring his collection was because Temple was in the heart of an African American community, and he wanted his collection to be accessible not only to Temple community, but also to the community at large, especially to African Americans, because he always said knowledge is power, you know, and he wanted that to occur. So when he brought his collection to Temple in 1984, he brought with him 20,000 items. And as mentioned in the documentary, we have over 700,000 items and growing today. And during my tenure, when I started in 2007, Mr. Blockson retired in 2006, but they had a national search. And of course, Mr. Blockson was on the committee. And when I was working on my doctorate in the history department at Temple, I was very fortunate to be able to be Mr. Blockson's graduate assistant. So I worked on with him on the book, The Journey of John W. Mosley. And that was fun because we were just farming through all these photographs. And, you know, we had all these wow moments. You know, it was just really fun. And so also because I was there, which I'll mention in a minute because I don't want to get off track here. Let me continue.
No, and don't. It's a conversation, so don't feel like you be obligated to. We gonna get it all in. Don't.
Okay. So then, also in 1984, he was the first African American to get a cover story in the National Geographic. And unfortunately, I don't have a copy here at home, but if you come to the collection, it's on display in one of the cases. And it was entitled Escape from Slavery, the Underground Railroad. And that piece was important, him being the first, but he also got his friend, Jerry Pinkney, to do the cover. So the cover is really beautiful. So I would encourage you all to come to the collection at some point too. He also led that year the first tour of the Underground Railroad to Harriet Tubman's home, from her home in Maryland to her home in Canada. So that was very important. In 1985, going back to the African American Museum again, he served on the board at the African American Museum. In 1986, National Geographic invited him or commissioned him to write an article on the sea change in the Sea Islands, where he talked about African Americans who were in the Sea Islands, and it's another great article. Then in 1987, do I have a copy of that? I don't think I have it here, but anyway, he wrote his book, The Underground Railroad, First Person Narratives of Escape to Freedom in the North. In 1987, that same year, he was awarded an honorary doctorate degree from Lincoln University. And on display in the Blockson collection, we have permanent exhibits on Mr. Blockson. They never changed, talking about his contributions. And there, in one of the cases, there's an image of him and Dr. Sadarkasa, and also the honorary degree. In 1990, Dr. Bernard C. Watson, who was the first Black president and chief executive officer of William Penn Foundation, awarded Mr. Blockson $92,000 and it was to fund the installation of 65 Black state historical markers in Philadelphia. So a lot of those markers that you see in Philadelphia, Mr. Blockson was instrumental in that. And I was there when he got the money, and I was really very appreciative and humbled because he included my dissertation topic in that group of historical markers. So I was able to get a marker placed for Musician Protective Union Local 274, which also founded the Clef Club. So there's a marker for the union down on South Broad Street, and it's further down from where the Clef Club is now. It was placed where it was prior to the city declaring eminent domain. You know how that goes. When they want us to move, you know, like, hey, they just, that's their move. Okay, so, but yeah, so that's there. And of course, I got to attend a number of the ceremonies, like the one for the unveiling of John Coltrane's and lots of others. And one of the things that really irked Mr. Blockson, and maybe you all can contact the Philadelphia Museum of Art, because the historical marker for Julian Abel, who actually designed the Philadelphia Museum of Art, who was an African American, right to the right of his marker is the statue of Rocky. So people come for that. You know, there's always lines there for this, you know, fictional person. But the marker for Julian Abel more or less gets ignored. And right now they have this, I don't know what it is, something actually in front of it. So you can't even really, it doesn't stand out. So if anybody rides by there, that might be, you know, something you all could do, complain about that. So, okay. He served as director of the Philadelphia African American Pennsylvania State Historical Project once he got those funds. In 1991, the Valley Forge chapter of Delta Sigma Theta sorority invited Mr. Blockson to serve as honorary chairperson of the Monument Project to recognize the participation of people of African descent in the American Revolutionary War. Mr. Blockson asked Cal Massey and sculptor Phil Sumter to design the monument. And there was a groundbreaking for that in April of 1993. So if you go out to Valley Forge Park, you'll see the monument out there. And Mr. Blockson was responsible for that. I should also mention that his daughter, Noelle, is a member of that chapter of Deltas too. In 1992, Mr. Blockson was invited and appointed chairperson of the advisory committee for the study of historical sites related to the Underground Railroad. And he was appointed by former President William Clinton. And we have an image of him signing that. So after the study that he did in 1992, that year, the U.S. Congress passed a public law recognizing the significance of the Underground Railroad in American history. So once again, Mr. Blockson's research was catalyst for the Underground Railroad becoming a national treasure. And in the Blockson collection, we have all of his research papers that he conducted related to the Underground Railroad. In 1992, I mentioned John W. Mosley's book. It was published that year. And also, Dr. Watson awarded Mr. Blockson another $50,000 to produce a guide. And these guides are down at the African American Museum. Have you seen some of these already? Yeah. In fact, we need some more. We need some. I know you all have boxes and boxes. I have to call Richard because, you know, we need.
Yeah, they're starting to give them out there at the museum too, as a part of people coming in.
Okay. Let's see, I'm skipping. I mean, what I'm giving you during the years, you know, it's just highlights, but it's so much more. Right. But in 1995, Mr. Blockson was awarded an honorary doctorate from Holy Family University. And then in 1996, he authored the history of the Afro American Historical and Cultural Museum, which they used for their anniversary. Then in 1998, excuse me a second, I'm bending down because I have these books in front of me. He published his memoir, Damn Rare. And then he published the next in 2000, Philadelphia, 1639 to 2000. Okay. In 2003, he published The Liberty Bell. And what he said is, you basically, you know, that the Liberty Bell was tied to slavery, and so he exposed that the African American story of the Liberty Bell. And I was very fortunate to be able to use it as a text in one of the courses I was teaching in African American history. In 2004. He published through the African American Museum, The Haitian Revolution, celebrating the first Black Republic. And at that time, Leslie Willis and I were actually at the African American Museum, and I was the curator of exhibitions and collections. And we invited Mr. Blockson to curate that particular exhibit, which was just wonderful what he did, you know, and it was very popular. And we have the catalog of the Haitian Revolution, which I'm sure you do have down there.
Right.
Yeah. But one of the things that was brought out, and it's interesting, is the fact that, you know, when we look at the United States and who gets to come into the borders and who doesn't, and oftentimes, you know, it's the people of African descent that are kept, you know. But in terms of the American Revolution, when General Lafayette came to fight for the Americans, he brought with him Africans. So Haitians of African descent actually fought for American freedom. So there should be, you know, they should be allowed in, right? No problem. So, but as Michael Eric Dyson once said in a lecture that I attended, that we live in the United States of amnesia. So, okay,
that's why we're here.
Let me continue, right? Okay. So in 2008, Mr. Blockson wrote a children's book, and it's just a wonderful book. I didn't pull it out. I have it here, but it's called The Ballad of the Underground Railroad. And then in 2010, Mr. Blockson inherited and donated to the National Museum of African American History and Culture 39 personal items of Harriet Tubman. And I'll tell you a little story around that. So by this time, Mr. Blockson was curator emeritus. And of course, I'm calling him all the time. And he, at that time, he was healthy enough whenever we had presentations or public programs, I was always able to get him to come in, to the programs, and everybody was excited and everything. So he calls me up one day and he says, "You won't believe what happened." And I said, "Well, what?" He said, I got a call from Merle Wilkinson's lawyer." I said, "Merle?" He said, "Come on, Diane, you know who she is, Harriet Tubman's great niece." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Well, she passed and bequeathed 39 personal items of Harriet Tubman's to me that I'm getting." And so he got the items, and I said, "Well, what are you going to do with the items?" He said, "Well, I'm going to pray on it, but in the meantime, I'm going to put them in my safety deposit box." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, do you think you want them to come to the collection?" He said, "Diane, don't start, please, please." So then he called me the next couple of days later. He said, "I moved the materials. I was uncomfortable with them being in my safety deposit box." I said, "Well, where did you move them?" He said, "To the safest place that I know." And I said, "Well, where's that, Mr. Blockson?" He said, "Under my bed." So until he decided through prayers that he would give them. And the reason why he decided the Smithsonian wasn't open yet, the National Museum of African American History and Culture wasn't open yet. But the reason why he wanted them to go there, because he said Harriet Tubman was such an international figure that it should be part of the Smithsonian. So once he made that decision, I asked him, "Well, for Women's History Month, can you bring the items there and have them on display?" So he agreed to that. So we had the items on display during Women's History Month for one Women's History program. And one of the things, when he brought them in and laid them out on the table, it just, one particular item brought tears to my eyes. And it was Harriet Tubman. Now, we know her as the Moses of our people, General Tubman. She made all these trips down into the South to liberate enslaved Africans. But on the table, one of the items was a collar, a beautiful embroidered collar. And the reason why it brought tears to my eyes is because as a Black woman, we have to be multifaceted. Sometimes we have to be really tough, and people don't understand us because we have to do this, but we're still women and we like feminine things, and Harriet Tubman did too. So, it was just wonderful to see that, So, yeah. So, when he donated, to get to that, what he did was he called Lonnie Bunch, who was the president and CEO of the National Museum. And and Lonnie said this in person. And actually he said it during the memorial tribute. I don't know who was there, but he said when Mr. Blockson called him and told him that he had 39 personal items of Harriet Tubman, he said, "I didn't believe him." I said, he said, "I'm a top historian, and I didn't know about these things. How could they exist?" But when he came up to Philadelphia and saw these things, the thing that was very significant, again, Mr. Blockson being a catalyst for everybody, you know, and Lonnie realized that, hey, if these items he didn't know about, there were a lot of things he didn't know about. So that's when he started to send his curators out into the community. And so if you've been down to the National Museum and you see all those unique items, once again, Mr. Blockson was catalyst to that, because he sent his curators out into community. And we all know that for Black folks, most of the time our homes are our archives, right? We have all kinds of things in our home. And at that, you know, I would encourage you all to think about a footnote. If you have materials in your home, think about where you would want them to be housed, you know. And the Blockson collection is probably the best place, because we not only preserve, our mission is to collect, preserve, and disseminate, but we also make materials accessible to researchers in the community. So they're in good hands. You know, Mr. Blockson isn't physically here, but he's, you know, he's here. Okay. So then in 2013, Mr. Blockson published this book, The President's House Revisited. And this was the result of when I was at the African American Museum. He was involved in this organization called Generations Unlimited, and they would meet at the African American Museum, Leslie and I downstairs in the auditorium. And at that particular time, they were advocating to have something placed at 6th and Market Street, because, you know, when they placed the Liberty Bell to move it there, they realized that, you know, enslaved Africans had lived, resided there, which was called 6th and High Street at the time. So one of the things, he had been talking about Samuel Francis for a long time, and saying that he was of African descent, right? And of course, nobody would go along with that, but finally they did. And he wrote the book about it. During the American Revolution, he served as a patriot and a spy for the American side. And he was also a steward in charge of George Washington's whole household staff at the president's house. And one thing I'd like to mention, because of Mr. Blockson meeting at the African American Museum, or just myself personally being associated with Mr. Blockson, you know, it brought me a lot of opportunities. One was the first time I was at the African American Museum, Emory from the African, Emory Wimbush, who was the librarian up at Lincoln, they needed an archivist. And so Mr. Blockson recommended me. So I went up to Lincoln and I worked up there for a while because of Mr. Blockson's recommendation. And then as a result of this Generations Limited and the whole controversy over, you know, what would be placed at 6th and Market Street, the city and the state and finally agreed with Mr. Blockson. So they allocated some money for something to be placed there. So at one point, and it was because of Mr. Blockson again, I met Dolores Brisbane at the time. She was chair of the Bethel Foundation, and she was writing a grant to get some work done on Mother Bethel. And she invited me to serve on that committee. So once the funds were set aside because of Mr. Blockson's effort, they put out proposals for architectural firms to put in applications to create something on that site. So one architectural firm that was headed by Alice Dahmer, who was non-Black, but she had worked with Dolores Brisbane, and Dolores Brisbane recommended me. She invited me to be the curator on their team. And so I talked to Mr. Blockson about it, and he agreed, but there was a little controversy over it. Like some members of his committee didn't like the fact that I was curating on this non-Black architectural firm, right? But one of the things Mr. Blockson said, it's important always for us to be in the room. And Alice Dahmer was really good because when I actually became curator, of course I had to do the research. And oftentimes the person who got highlighted about that site was Hercules, the cook, because he was able to liberate himself while he was in Philadelphia, right? But guess what? I found out. And Mr. Blockson is more or less responsible for me writing this book. My name is Oni Judge. And, I found out about Oni Judge doing my research, and a non-Black author wrote a novel about Oni Judge and said to her about her that Oni Judge left George and Martha Washington, but she was ambivalent about that. I read it, and it was like, it wasn't like Oni Judge she channeled me to write this, because the next thing after I read that, I'm writing, my name is Oni Judge, and I took my freedom. There was no ambivalence about it. She took her freedom. And so I ended up writing this whole script, and I told Mr. Blockson, and Mr. Blockson said to me, I wanted one of the elder artists to do it. And he recommended Cal Massey. And at the time, I didn't know Cal Massey, but I called him, Mr. Blockson gave me, and I told him, and I took to him my narrative. And on each page, I had put, what I thought the image should be. And so Mr. Massey got in contact with me after a week and said, yes, I'll do it. And I think, all of the descriptions of illustrations should be included. So, I was really happy about that. And because Mr. Massey worked at the Franklin Mint, if you look at the book, like all of the clothing is in that particular era, but because it was a children's book, he just brightened the colors, And so the last page of the book, Oni says, listen, children, remember me. When you talk about freedom, when you think about freedom, my name is Oni Judge, and I took my precious freedom. So, and it was published by Third World Press.
Which is a Black publishing company.
Oh yeah. All my books are published by Third World Press. As a matter of fact, and all my, my personal books are published by Third World Press. And once again, Mr. Blockson was instrumental in that. After Oni Judge, before Oni Judge, Feeding the Soul, Black Music, Black Thought. And after Oni, I found out my dad was a Montford Point Marine. And so it's a story, our grandpop is a Montford Point Marine. And the last one, which Mr. Blockson was aware of, which was co-authored by a non-Black, Suzanne Cloud. She has an organization called Jazz Bridge, and she's legitimate. She approached me. So through Arcadia, we did this book. It came out in November of last year, Philadelphia Jazz. But the most important thing about this book is that 99% of the photographs are from the Blockson collection. So once again, we got a chance to promote the Blockson collection. Okay, I'm moving along. How are we doing on time? Oh, it's after 11. Okay, I'll kind of wrap up. Okay, so during the time that I was here, one of the things that Mr. Blockson really was very pleased about was when he submitted a application to the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission for the Pennsylvania Slave Trade State Historical Marker, which they approved, and Mr. Blockson personally paid for that marker. If you go down on where the Delaware is River, next to the Independent Seaport Museum, there's the marker down there, and it reads, African people first enslaved by the Dutch and Swedes survived the brutal voyage from Africa to the Caribbean islands and the Americas, debarking on the Delaware River waterfront as early as 1639. William Penn, other Quakers, and Philadelphia merchants purchased and enslaved Africans. As the institution of slavery increased, these courageous people persevered and performed integral roles in building Pennsylvania and the nation. And it was especially for the young people because, like oftentimes, especially with the last president, I'm not even going to mention his name or anything, this notion that people of African descent don't belong here. And some of the oldest Americans are people of African descent. And the young people need to know that, that they're entitled to be here because of their ancestors. They basically built the very foundations of this nation. Okay, so he was very pleased about that. Then in 2017, Mr. Blockson was the 98th recipient of the Philadelphia Award. And we had a ceremony up at Temple here. It was really wonderful. And this is what they wrote about him. The Comcast and the Philadelphia Award. Charles is one of those rare souls who has put all of his energies into understanding and celebrating every triumph and travail of African American history, so that future generations may never be left wondering where they came from, who they are. And that's what they had to say. And the last three things, and I'm done. In 2002, an exhibit opened celebrating Mr. Blockson over in Norristown. It's in the Center Theater. You can make arrangements to go over there on the weekends. Al Zone, who's the president and CEO of the Elmwood Zoo, when he was in high school, a long-term resident of Norristown, non-Black, but Mr. Blockson had such an impact on him that he approached us talking about wanting to do this exhibit. And so all the materials that are on display over there are from the Blockson collection. So I would encourage you to go over there. He did a fantastic job. And then also in 2002, SEPTA, Rochelle Culbreth approached me about putting a team together to do some historical panels on Mr. Blockson. And I'm sure you all have seen the panels that are down on Cecil B. Moore and Broad Street as you go down. Those panels that are there that celebrate Cecil B. Moore.
Right.
Has
Yes, I have.
Well, I always complain because I said they're not big enough, right? So one of the things Mr. Blockson always said to me is, look, if anybody gives you any trouble, Diane, use my name. Okay, so when we put all the text together, and then I showed Mr. Blockson what we did, and we had our own graphic designer who Leslie introduced me to, Alexa, who actually was the graphic illustrator for Oni Judge. So we got the whole package together. We sent it to SEPTA, and SEPTA said, it's too much information on here. And so, you know what I told him?
Mr. Blockson.
He said he wanted exactly what it was. So if you go to the Elm Street station over in Norristown, his panels are really big, you know, and we were very happy about that. And really, that's the way they should be for Cecil B. Moore too. But nobody could advocate and use Mr. Blockson's name for that, I guess. So, and then this year in July, just in July, unfortunately, Mr. Blockson had become an ancestor, but he knew this was going to happen. They renamed an elementary school over in Norristown for Mr. Blockson. So there's a Charles L. Blockson Elementary School in Norristown. Yeah, so I'll end there.
Yeah, and thank you. And what I wanted to do first, besides thanking you, and we at Black Docents Collective, thanking you for, you know, sharing this, and it's a lot of pieces that I got out. I wanted to know if you can give us maybe the members say 20 minutes more, so that we can be able to ask, you know, questions based off of what you present, because we're able to narrate as docents, as tour guides, what Dr. Blockson's wishes are, and so, you know, so I would like, if any of the members of Black Docents have any questions or want to explore more with Dr. Turner, if it's okay with you, Dr. Turner, can we get that 20 minutes or more of your time? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anybody, a member that has, based off of, because I have many, but I'm gonna, you know, I'm gonna be disciplined, you know, right here, right now. But is there any other members that may have questions for, or, you know, want thoughts that they want to clarify with Dr. Turner? All right, y'all, don't. I'm not good for sounds. I see you off mic, Mike.
First off, I want to thank Dr. Turner for joining us. We really appreciate you and all the things that you had to say that provided some additional context to the work of Mr. Blockson and yourself as part of the Blockson collection. What I wanted to ask about in particular is about the future of the Blockson collection. And by all means, you want to continue the mission. I'm wondering if there are plans to expand the scope so that younger people have access to the collection, because they tend to use different means than we do, we being a little bit older, to access information. Any technological ways that you may have of increasing access?
Okay, so we work a lot with the School District of Philadelphia. Ishmael Jimenez, who is the Director of Social Studies, and even before him, Melvin Garrison, before he retired, they would bring us teachers up there to do teachers workshops, and we'd pull materials to show how the teachers could incorporate the Black experience into any topic that was taught. Circadiz Alamehu, who is our digital specialist, we, especially during the pandemic, because Temple was closed, we started digitizing more materials. So you can actually go online and access through the Blockson collection. There's materials on the John W. Mosley collection. There's finding aids, not all of our finding aids, but our finding aids are up and you can access them. And we just got a grant from Getty And with that grant, hopefully we'll be able to finish digitizing the John W. Mosley photographs. We have over 200,000 negatives and photographs that John Mosley took between the late 1937 through the late 1967. We also, as part of that grant, we're working with a sister that's over in Charles, Jasmine Clark, and her team are creating an app, and the app will be for students, high school students, to learn how to use an archives. So that particular part. Also, if you hold on 1 second here, I'm going to go, I think I'm looking right at it. We got a grant from Pew. 1 second, okay?
Mm-hmm.
This particular book, and this was done before George Floyd event, horrible event that occurred, or attack, but we were able to get a grant from Pew, and the title of this is called Black Lives Always Mattered, Hidden African American Philadelphia of the 20th Century. So what we were doing, this is geared towards young people and also the Black Lives Matter movement. We wanted to show them that historically, Black lives have always mattered. And that's the thing, you know, like we promote is the fact that African American history is American history and African history is world history. And Mr. Blockson, when he would come to the collection, and somebody wanted to interview him, and they asked a question, and it's important, you know, like Mr. Blockson mentioned in the documentary that we're the only group of people that were denied access to learning or prohibited from learning how to read and write. So reading and writing is important. You know, I think the electronic part in digital age is fine, but it's going to have to compete. We still need books. You know, some people, you know, you always need books. You need to come to the collections and see things, touch them to see. So, you know, I think the electronic part's good, but we will continue to collect. Now, this book, what we did with this is there's three main reasons. Oh, you have one there. I
signed it for me too.
Well, I'm just going to, you can tell him, you know, what do you think of the book? But I just want to put on, before you say anything, we donated 5,000 copies to the School District of Philadelphia through Ishmael. And it was based on, they would go to high schools, especially those in North Central Philadelphia. And in order to get a set of these books, the teachers had to take African American workshops. And three of the reasons why we did the book was to, first of all, promote literacy. You know, we want to promote literacy. You know, the emphasis is always on STEM. But if you can't read and write, STEM don't mean nothing, right? You got to, you know, that's what the emphasis should be on first, reading and writing. We also wanted to eradicate stereotypes, right? There's always this emphasis in the larger society about poverty and crime without even putting it in the context of, you know, well, why is it? You know, so we wanted to give examples that there's much more to the community than poverty and crime. And in spite of those things that are imposed on the community to create those things, we had these individuals that were able to overcome. And then a third thing, we were able to get Eric Battle, who was raised in North Philadelphia, right on Cecil B. Moore. He works with Marvel and DC Comics, and he assembled a group of artists together to do this. We wanted to promote the arts because, you know, like, in a sense, you know, this is just me personally. I think it's a conspiracy, you know, like, and and if you all don't mind, I'm gonna use some Ebonics, right? How come the arts, all of the things that African Americans can have shown that they could excel in the past, like the arts, music, and sports, are the things that get taken out of the public schools? How come? You know. So, do you want to mention, you know, that? What do you think of the graphic novel?
Oh, it's gorgeous. It is gorgeous, and it's so friendly, I think, for that population because it's in like in a graphic novel form. I'm like you, I love the art. So the illustrators were really like amazing. And I think it's bite size enough to kind of get them, because you can't overload young folks because it's a lot of information out there. So the way the information is kind of like, you know, formatted where it's not so much coming at you, so you can just sit with a morsel of it and then maybe build on your own as you get a little bit of the story. And it's real like a story too. Like I was looking at the Father Paul Washington part from the Church of the Advocate, and you signed it when I went to the Church of the Advocate, so I have a personal signed copy from you. Just the husband, Paul Washington and his wife, and the dialogue of what he was going through. So the bringing in their humanness, their interaction, they were great people, but they were human, everyday folks, and so you can relate to that, and kids need to relate to that because you could be extraordinary being ordinary, you know what I mean? So I really do love it, so thank you.
Okay, now in terms of the future of the collection, one of the things that Mr. Blockson was advocating for, and I'm advocating, we need more space. So we're trying to get more space because part of it is also, you know, we want to have a community space. I get a lot of calls from the community with people wanting to come in to that space, you know, have a tour and maybe have, you know, like a meeting or something in the Blockson collection. And we do it, even though we don't have the space, but it would be nice to have the space. In terms of young people, I mentioned Karen Falcon. Her students and her school only goes to middle school. She brought her students in. They did research. Well, they've done research on the Underground Railroad, and we had that program. It's recorded. For the most part, all of our programs are recorded, and you can access them through the Temple University Library website. But they did the research on MOVE, submitted an application to the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, and it was approved. So they're responsible for that marker over on Osage. These young people, they just goes to middle school. They were very serious. You don't see these individuals in the news, you know, like we can talk about crime, but you know, like, and the gun violence, it is a problem. But for every bad thing that happens, there's 100,000 good things that young people are doing that don't get covered. And it's the same, you know, that's why, you know, we did the book, or that's why Mr. Blockson started collecting anyway, you know, like, because in the larger media, they've always focused on that to try to justify institutional racism and white supremacy. So we're going to continue to collect. If people want digital, fine, we'll encourage them, but people want to come into the collection too. And we will encourage, we're going to keep on collecting things. Right now, one of the areas that we've gotten a lot of materials in and we're collecting is in jazz. And that's one of the areas where I was teaching in. We have Bootsy Barnes' collection. Unfortunately, we had a jazz appreciation program annually, and Bootsy was always the person who played. And unfortunately, he was the first victim of COVID. You know, it was announced in March, and he passed in April of 2020. So we have his collection there. You know, we named, it was called the Jazz Appreciation. In honor of him, it's now called the Bootsy Barnes Jazz Annual. So you know, once again, we're keeping tradition, but at the same time, you know, moving ahead with the technology. Now, one of the things I would tell you to read is a book by Marimba Ani called Yurugu. And in it, it talks about the European thought and thinking. For them, you know, progress is constant change. You know, for us, we need to keep our traditions. And with the constant change, because for them, progress is constant change. But I'm seeing that the constant change isn't always for the better. Like right now, we had Google and they changed the Outlook. We all complain about it because we can't find half the things we want. Before, if you emailed me, all I had to do was key your name at the top and your email would come up. Now it comes up, we don't have any records, you know, it's crazy. So I hope we will continue Mr. Blockson's legacy. And, you know, we mentor individuals. Our student workers are undergraduate and also graduates. So we're having people who the future, you know, when I retire, there's people I could recommend, you know, who have worked in the collection or whatever. But, you know, Mr. Blockson's legacy will continue.
You know, it's one thing that, well, it's a couple of things that jumped out. Three, I'm gonna say three. One, which kind of opened with the intergenerational part, you know, the part in the film when he said his grandfather mentioned about the Underground Railroad. This is before the teacher.
You
know, this is, and I think it's important for us to understand, you know, to this point, but that his family was passing orally a historical narrative. He intuitively, even with the reaction of teachers, went and pursued it. And then I'm looking at your experience with him and perpetuating this. I think that's, you know, because we're, you know, him finding that statement of his family in that text reinforces in text or oral tradition that's African in itself. And then, you know, the perpetuation of his collection, his life work that you're curating as far as the books and culture. I thought that was important.
So just a footnote on that too. What I would encourage you all to do, if you haven't already, is to read his memoir, Damn Rare. Because there was a time, one time, like Mr. Blockson, I mean, you know, like he was a cultural warrior, and you know, like if he liked you, you know, he was. But you know, if you rubbed him the long way, you know, you would see thunder come out. So one time, someone in the news wanted to interview him, and they asked him a question, and he said to them, "Did you read my book, Damn Rare?" You know, because it was in the book, you know, and you know, like when I taught full time, you know, at the university level, one of the things I would always tell my students to do: look, before you interview somebody, you need to find out do the research and find out as much information as you can about that person, because it will help you form good questions, right? You know, like if you don't know anything, you know, that the question. So when the person said they didn't read the book, he said, "Well, I don't have no time to talk to you. You're not serious." And he wouldn't talk to him, you know. And, you know, like we're a special collection. We focus on research and reading, you know, so it's important, you know, knowledge is power. You couldn't approach him, you know, like with nonsense. You had to be serious. You had to do your research. And that's the thing, you know, always do your research, you know.
I don't think, Diane.
One other thing, in terms of Mr. Blockson and the teacher, in his book, Damn Rare, he talks about like his father was a collector and he was a member of the NAACP. So they were getting the crisis. His father was also getting all the Black newspapers, especially the Tribune, He had a copy of Richard Wright's Black Boy and everything. So, you know, like he was learning at that level, right? And you know, like even today with Ron DeSantis, what he's doing, banning books in Florida, we have a copy, a first edition of The Negro in Our History that Carter G. Woodson came out with in 1923, 23-24, you know, I might have the date wrong, but a colored school out in Oklahoma used that book. You know, they bought the book and they were going to teach their colored students, right? When the school district, the board, school board found out that that Black people were going to learn about Black people, you know what they did? They banned the book.
Mm-hmm.
They confiscated all the books. They fired the principal. And, you know, like the teachers, you know, they were reprimanded. So, you know, it's nothing new under the sun. So guess what Carter G. Woodson did when that happened? The following year, he created Negro History Week. And then, you know, he institutionalizes Black history. So we don't need the larger society to tell us what to do. All we got to do, okay, now this is my music with what's it? Roberta Flack. She did this song called "Go Up Moses." She said, "My people, let Pharaoh go. You don't need him. You don't need his tricks. You know, and all you got to do is let him go. Just wake up tomorrow morning and say, bye, Pharaoh, honey." You know. So I'm saying that to say we, you know, like
you speaking my language now. I'll stop. Okay.
So just to go with what you said is, you know, like we, you know, the Blockson collection, I tell everybody, you know, you're welcome to come there. You can sit there all day and do research. You know, we have everything. And guess what? The key word about it is FREE. It don't cost you nothing. You know, so and you know, we encourage students, like Karen brings her students here. Any students can come in. We had Strawberry Mansion. They brought some students there. And I wish the news was there for that, you know, like the news media, because they did some research there. And then as appreciation, they came back and somebody donated some drums to them. And they came back and played several selections for us to show their appreciation. You know, so once again, young people, they're doing a lot of good things, you know.
And I don't want to hold you up, but I heard if it's two things, I don't know. At least where
wait a minute, there was someone else.
Yeah, at least are you excuse me.
Did
you have something?
You're on mute.
Okay, you know, because of time constraints, I forget about that question, but damn rare, you can't really get it. Is it going to be available with John, with the Coates publication? You know, because it's out of print. I was
you should call Leslie. We might have some copies to sell.
Okay, then I'll call her.
Yeah, Leslie.
Okay.
In the Blockson collection.
Okay. All right.
You know, Dr. Turner, because we have, and to our guests who came, is because, you know, the reason why we kind of wanted to make it the questioning part for members is so that, you know, we can be able to really do what we, hopefully you would agree, have this exchange, because there's people who are working on the Underground Railroad, there's people working on 1838, there's people working on the Stephen Smith and William Whipper. And what Dr. Blockson did in this collection and his publications gives us the ability to be able to create this narrative. So what I hear is the opportunity in us closing is to, at some future date, bring you back, because I would like us to open up even more about what is it our role you know, the tradition, because you heard one thing I picked up in this, he constantly was bringing up about the Underground Railroad. Philadelphia still, and hopefully we'll get the, you know, the quest of creating this, our narrative and, you know, process, because everybody seems to be working on the Underground Railroad. Dr. Blockson is instrumental in bringing Underground Railroad, but here in Philadelphia, we haven't, and to your point, Black Philadelphia haven't taken ownership of narrating the Underground Railroad. So I'm just using that as an example of the contribution and the work we have to do in being able to, and utilizing Dr. Blockson's collection and your assistance. So I'm just saying we need to, if you don't mind, I'm putting out a feeler for the future, would you come back to us and we can continue this conversation exchange.
Yeah. Now, Melvin Garrison, we did a workshop with his teachers, and it relates to the Underground Railroad because it was titled Black Abolitionists.
Right.
Because oftentimes, you know, that they get left out. But I guess what I would say is, you know, like oftentimes we try to look at things in black and white, but, you know, there's a whole hue of different shades and colors, and it's complicated. You know, it's like, for example, it's like when Spike Lee said, if you get 5 Black people in the same room, they'll all have different ideas about things, right? So when you look at our history and what's going on and everything, you can't put people into one category. You know what I mean? It's very complex. And oftentimes, like when I was teaching full time, and a student would ask me a question, and I tell everybody now I have the best job at Temple, because for me, even though I specialize in African American history, and I know a fairly good amount about African American history, I still, through inquiries, every day is a learning experience for me, because our history is so deep and extensive, you know.
Right.
And so sometimes, you know, as docents, when you're taking people through, if they ask a question, you don't always have to have an answer. You know, you can say, oh, that's very interesting. I'll do some research, but I'd like you to do some research and come back and tell me what you find out. Because that's the way, you know, to draw them into, as opposed to just asking questions, be proactive in it. Do some research yourself if you have a question.
Yes.
That's helpful.
And thank you. And for those who are guessing, and I apologize, I'm still learning Zoom, so y'all see me fuddling around. And again, I apologize for our late start, and want to thank you, Dr. Turner, for willing to share. But if for those who are interested in what is Black Docents Collective, you can go to our website, and blackdocentscollective.org, and see what we have posted in our exchange and our events. The next major event will be is that for Kwanzaa. The committee is working on that right now, and also one of the members have a website. Is that 1838? You know. You know, which is also a wealth of information that is posed on there from one of the members of that. So what I want to do is close out with everyone's blessing, and hopefully I'll be able to, because I got this song. I'm sorry, y'all. I got this song. I gotta play, and that's closing. And we'll be looking forward to Dr. Turner and to the guests for you joining us in the future. And thank you so much, you know, for your time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Everybody be safe and take care.
Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Okay. Take care.